Hello, Rich and Beth. I'm inspired by Rich's video where he did a stand-up response in his video, and so I'm going to try to do the same thing here. I've had some back problems, so I'm thinking about doing more standing up at work anyway, so new experience for me. All right, well, I'm going to answer some of the same questions that I asked you. First of all, I'm an Educational Foundations faculty member, and actually starting today, I'm the acting associate dean for the College of Education and Human Services. So new responsibilities for me starting today. My family lives in, I live with my family here in the Penn Manor School District, so Liz, one of my children at least might have one of your classes in a year from now. My son's on the AP Calc track, and I guess he would take that as a junior. He's going to be a sophomore coming up. Okay, so I want to talk about some hidden assumptions or some assumptions I've had in the past and how I've evolved on some of those. A really big one for me relates to teacher reflection, which has been an area of interest that I've had for at least 10 or 15 years. And when I've done work with teacher reflection, I have always looked at it from kind of a micro perspective, which is that I would look at the very act of thinking in a moment. So a teacher has an issue. They go through a process of thinking through the issue and how they're going to improve. And that act, that singular act, is what I've considered to be teacher reflection. But over time I've thought, well, does that act, that individual act, actually make anyone a better teacher? Is that really a significant thing? Or is what is significant developing that habit and a perspective that is more carried over decades of practice. Now, I come from the teacher ed perspective, so I'm thinking like, how do we get our student teachers to do reflection? And so it's very episodic, and I haven't thought long term. But recently I've started to think, it really, whether they are reflective or not in practice during their student teaching or during courses here at Miller, so it really doesn't matter. What matters is if they develop habits of curiosity and openness to learning that's carried over a long period of time. So I've spent 15 years on this, and like all of a sudden I realize I totally have not understood anything for all this time. So that's kind of scary and sending me back to the drawing board and rereading everything that I've read in the past too, now that I have a completely different idea. All right, and that actually kind of relates to what I'm going to talk about next. And I want to preface this by telling you a little bit more background about me. I was a former debater, and I was a former debate coach, and I love to argue. And so sometimes you're going to find in this course that I'll just start arguing with you. And usually I actually kind of mean what I'm saying, but sometimes I don't, because sometimes I just like to argue. So I want you to know that so you don't take it personally. And I also consider that to be somewhat of the process of philosophy where you have to consider alternatives. So I'm happy to play devil's advocate. Now in this one, I'm really actually not playing devil's advocate. This is something I've been thinking about for a while. I'm going to sort of disagree with something both of you have already said. So Rich, in your video, you had said that you do lecture because it's who you are as a teacher. I'm not disagreeing with lecture. I actually agree with what you had to say about doing lecture. But it's the part about you saying who you are as a teacher. And then Elizabeth, you had said in the response to your intro on the Plato that you think children are born pure. So in the last, both of those things kind of relate to something else that I've been thinking about. And that is, I've been feeling like there's a big problem in teacher education, and I would say in teacher development generally, where as a profession, we tend to have a fixed view of teachers rather than an incremental view. Going back to some of the work of Dweck and others who argue that children and others, in order to grow, need to consider themselves as someone who can potentially change, not that they are fixed. And so both of those ideas that you guys had posted, to me, remind me of an author that I'm going to bring in because of what you've already said is Parker Palmer, who he thinks that what teachers have to do is find their true self and bring it out. They don't need to learn something new. They need to kind of forget things they've already learned that are wrong and find their true inner self and then teach from that inner self. And I think this is an idea that's prevalent in education, and I think it can be harmful because then we start to think, well, I'm either a good teacher or a bad teacher. I can't really learn or change because I am who I am. And so therefore, if I get a bad evaluation on a certain thing, I'm just going to really be mad about that or hurt about that rather than thinking, well, it's just like anything else in life. I just need to work harder at this, or I need to learn a specific skill that I don't currently have. So maybe I'm stretching both of your viewpoints when I connect that to this incremental versus fixed view of teaching. But I think as a profession, we do have a fixed view of teachers. You're either good or bad. You're either energetic or not energetic. You're either funny or you're not funny. You're either smart or you're not smart. All these various things that we actually can develop as teachers, but we tend to think that it's not how you develop, but who you are and how you were born. And I think that's harmful because if we think that way, we're never going to get better as a profession. And there's almost no other area of life where we try to develop people where we have that as a fixed idea. And so I think it's harming our profession. So anyways, looking forward to the course together. And I just want to say one more thing, and that is as we get into the Plato module, of course, it's interesting to talk about virtue, and it's interesting to talk about the ideas that Plato wrote about. But the real purpose of the Plato module is to expose you to one way of philosophical thinking. So it's more the process that we're going to go through in the Plato module than the actual answers to the questions. Now, some other modules that are coming up, it might be more the content of the philosophy that we're looking at. But we're starting out trying to get into a philosophical way of developing arguments with the Plato module. All right, see you guys online.